Hey, folks, and welcome back to the WPMRR WordPress podcast. As always, I'm Joe.
And I'm Qui-Gon.
And you're listening to the WordPress Business Podcast. We have a OG Jedi on the podcast today. What's going on, Qui-Gon?
Well, I'm still trying to find my next Padawan, but other than that, things are quite well.
Just make sure the name of your new Padawan is not Anakin Skywalker. As long as we can avoid an Anakin that turns into Darth Vader, we're going to be all good.
I can't make any promises there, but we'll see.
There you go. Yeah. History has already told itself. I think we have made your selection. Very cool to have Qui-Gon on the pod this week. Not actually Qui-Gon Jinn, but we actually have the one and only Joost de Valk. And I actually had to ask Joost when we jumped on. I was like, okay, the company's called Yoast. Your name is spelled Joost. Are those the same? Is your name different? And then you had kind of a funny story behind that.
Yeah, it's actually a friend of mine now, Rand Fishkin of Moz and now SparkToro. When we first met 12 years ago at a conference in Stockholm, he asked me, so how do I pronounce your name? And I explained it to him. He's like, so it's Toast with a Y. And he's like, he was saying that to me. And as he said that, I was like, yes. And I turned around and registered Yoast.com. And well, that's where it started. This is when I started using the nick for myself and later on for the company.
Very nice. That's cool that you know Rand pretty well. I'm a big fan of Rand and everything that he did at SEO Moz and now at SparkToro. And I've also read his book a few months ago. It was right when it came out. And honestly couldn't put it down. It was one of the most kind of, you read a lot of stuff in the startup world.
It's a very good read. Rand actually spoke at our conference last week. Nice. I was chatting with him. Like, I read your book. And then I saw that you got funding for your new company, and I couldn't reconcile the two.
Wait a second.
So now he has done that in quite a different way for his new company, but it's always funny to us because at Yoast we don't have any funding. We've always grown basically on our own cash. There's no outside investors whatsoever. So it's my wife, myself, and Omar and Michiel, our management team. We own the company with the four of us. And yeah, it's weird to me to look at all those dynamics of outside investors and all these things. It feels unhealthy.
Yeah, WP Buffs is similarly bootstrapped, and not quite at the scale of Yoast, not yet. But I feel the same way. It's it's so important when you're if you're raising money to have really the same, not only the same kind of value structure as the people who are investing in your company, but the same idea and where the company is going. And even if you do have that, I think the chances are still high that, you're getting into a marriage at that point. And it's if there's something that's, they're different thinking between the two parties, then there's going to be trouble down the line. And you can avoid all that, although maybe moving a little bit slower if you bootstrap and self-fund. I mean, now that we're kind of diving into this, I have some questions I kind of want to talk about in the interview, but now that we're talking about this, I want to talk about this a little more. What did Yoast look like at the beginning of the company, 10 years ago, if that's accurate?
Well, it's not even 10 years ago yet. So I founded Yoast, the company, in May 2010, basically to do consulting. I was doing SEO consulting for some of the largest brands in the world and basically started doing that on my own. So I had a couple of clients that I could take along from my previous job, including eBay. So I had a very safe salary based on that. But it was just me. There was no WordPress SEO plugin yet. I mean, I had some plugins, but it was all relatively small, and there was certainly no money coming from that. And over time, I made a lot of money on affiliate for hosting stuff and hired my first employee, Michiel, who's now one of our partners, to help me in doing consulting. And then in 2012, we started selling plugins. And only early 2014 did we start selling WordPress SEO Premium. So that's 5 years ago.
Yeah, so that's really 4 or 5 years that you've really started to see some more financial success. I think that's an important lesson for people listening. Sometimes it takes time.
Well, we were already growing. We were doing well. I mean, we could not complain. The step from being 2 people in 2012 to being over 100 people now was quite a step. Yeah.
It's fast growth for a bootstrap company for sure. One that's self-funded. I think there are few funded companies out there that can grow that pace, but that's a very, very big challenge for someone for a company that's self-funded.
Yeah, it's always cash flow is always a challenge. At the same time, it's also like that challenge also keeps you on your edge. The fact that there's no unlimited amount of money, but you have to make like smart decisions about your money. Because otherwise you will not be able to afford so you have to predict all the time, like how much of this growth that we've had over the last few months is sustainable. And we've basically grown between 50 and 70% per year over the last 7 years. So, I mean, that is in many ways ridiculous if you look at it. We've just been lucky in a way, and we were quite quick into a market quite well, I think. It's a bit more of a challenge when you're completely self-funded and when there's no external money. So there has really never been like a couple of million in the bank to feel free on.
Yes, it makes it a very different story. But cool, it's interesting to hear about how Yoast came about, and now kind of yourself, you're moving in a slightly new direction. You're now the marketing and communications lead for WordPress. Tell us a little bit about how that transition transpired. I just used 2 T words. That might be a little confusing. How did that all come about? Has it been kind of a little while? You've been thinking about this for the last year or so, or is this something that's been more recent?
Well, no. So I've been working on like what is SEO for WordPress and what is marketing for WordPress in general for quite a while already. Matt and I have been talking about that topic for 3-4 years. And over time, we've been investing more and more time into WordPress as Yoast. So last year, we had like 10 people working full-time on WordPress core. And I started feeling like, hey, I want to be involved closer myself. I've been a fan and user of WordPress for over a decade. I feel like I have something to add to the project that developers do not necessarily have to add, because we had marketing, but it wasn't really like coming into full fruition, and I felt it needed more and more power. And well, talk to Matt about that, and at a certain point we decided like, hey, this is we should probably do this. And that's I mean, going into it now has also been very fun because there's a lot of work to do. But there's also been such a gigantic positive response from the community, from agencies, etc., reaching out and offering design time and help to fix things on WordPress.org and more, in a slightly broader spectrum. So we're redesigning the showcase at the moment. We've already rewritten like 5 or 6 pages on .org that were really old. We now have a roadmap that's up to date. It's all that simple stuff that feels simple, but that I felt needed more attention than it was getting. And the positive response from everybody has been awesome. So it's a lot of work, but at the same time, it's also, I feel like I'm mostly unlocking other people to do the work. And it's really cool to be able to work on that.
I think that's it's an underrated skill of a leader, that they unlock the ability of other people to be able to do an awesome job, right? Your job as leading the marketing team is to optimize the whole team. It's not just you doing all the work or executing on everything. You have a whole team under you to do all that. You mentioned the roadmap, which is pretty exciting, I'm sure. So a lot of my questions I have today are coming from your blog, which is just yoast.blog, which is, it's not Yoast, Yoast. It's your actual name, Joost.blog. So you can check out the blog there for people who want to follow along kind of while you're listening. But the roadmap, there's a link to the roadmap there.
I think the first step for us now is to get WordPress.org to be more reflective of how good a CMS WordPress is. I think we're not always doing a very good job of telling that story. and also of telling the story of which use cases WordPress is good for. So that starts with a redesign of some of the core pages on .org and a redesign and refilling of the showcase. Then I'd like to add an enterprise section to WordPress.org to highlight a bit more how WordPress is used in the enterprise and what kind of things there are there, because I think it's really undervalued in that area. And then on top of that, one of the longer going plans, but that'll take a lot of coordination, is we have all these WordCamps worldwide, and if I can make all those WordCamps reach one or more journalists that they can actually tell about WordPress and tell the story of both WordPress the platform and WordPress the community. If we can reach that, then we'll suddenly have a reach that's like very hard to beat. So I want to really involve the community a bit more in marketing WordPress as a whole, and use all these events that we have, not to just talk to ourselves, but also to talk to the wider community.
Cool.
I mean, in a way, we owe it to ourselves to have that kind of quality. And it's also a matter of, that's something that Matt started last year by starting the growth councils and by getting the agencies and the hosts more involved. I think all of us have a combined, well, we all benefit from a WordPress that grows, and telling that story better together and using our combined resources to tell that story better is incredibly powerful.
Yeah, very much agree. I think the community is clearly one of the strongest aspects of WordPress. And to continue to grow it, we'll have to do it together.
Yeah, we've done a relatively good job of telling people what the software could do. I don't even think a really good job, but a relatively good job. We've done a pretty shitty job of telling them the power of the community and why there's so much more than just the list of features that they should pick WordPress for. The fact that you can start using WordPress and find developers, whereas for a lot of other CMSs, finding developers already is a big problem. Simple stuff like that can make a whole lot of difference when somebody needs to make a decision.
Yeah, agreed. I think that, Chrissy and I talk a lot about products in the WordPress space. And, obviously, like, as you have to create a great product for people to want to buy it, for people to want to be involved in your community under WordPress, all of that stuff. But the other side is the business development, is the marketing, is the communication side of things. I mean, those things have to be strong if you want to see growth like you've seen at Yoast, right? Like 50% growth year over year for 7 years. If we want to continue the growth with WordPress, that seems like it's going to be key.
Yeah, to be fair, WordPress already has the type of market share where that kind of growth is no longer possible.
Right. I don't think 50% year over year is going to be quite possible.
If we're going to go from 33%, which we're currently at, to 48 in a year, you think I'll call it a success. I'd also think that's rather scary. No, I mean, let's be realistic. The amount of time it takes for websites to switch over to another CMS is not a year anyway. I think people build a website for 3 to 5 years, and so you're not going to get like that massive amount of growth on the CMS side. Switching out a plugin is relatively easy. So yeah, I think there's we should aim for growth. We've had growth over the last few years. It's not like the growth for WordPress has really slowed down. But yeah, I mean, we'll just have to keep an eye on it.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really important what you said about the growth of WordPress powering the growth of all of our jobs as well. At the end of the day, everybody who works in WordPress does owe it to WordPress for our financial freedom, for us.
I mean, I could have built the most awesome SEO plugin for Joomla and been absolutely nowhere now.
Right.
I mean, that would make the market that we could reach like 11 times smaller than WordPress without even a lot of my own doing at that point. So it's like we all have benefited from the gigantic growth of WordPress over time. And that's also why I want to give back now and be involved in helping sustain that growth.
Very cool. Speaking of Joomla, speaking of Wix and Squarespace and all the other CMSs out there. You have a very interesting post on your blog, on Joost.blog, Yoast.blog, that talks about some of the relative growth of some of these CMSs compared to others. Obviously, everyone knows the de facto line, WordPress powers a third of the web. I guess almost a third of the web. We're just about there. But
30, I was just looking at it, 33.1% now. It's like
so close. But you talked a little bit about, in this post, it definitely piqued my interest because I didn't know about a lot of this relative growth. And so from your calculations, you've kind of looked at how much growth, not just total market share each of these CMSs has, but how their growth has looked over the past years compared to the growth of the other CMSs around them.
Well, and to their own size. Yes. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. From what you've kind of discovered here in a few of your calculations, it looks like the open source market or the open source market share is growing, but most of that is powered by WordPress.
Yeah.
The other kind of fast growing CMSs out there are not. They're closed. So it seems like, although open source is still technically winning, a lot of people are moving to these it just works closed systems because they want to get on, they want to build something, they just want it to work. What do you think the future looks like in terms of like how does WordPress play a role in that future? Does WordPress continue to be the leader, and what does it have to do to remain there?
So I think we'll probably remain the leader. We can't grow at those rates anymore simply because we're already as big as we are. And so relative growth is also a weird metric because if you're our size, you'll never have the relative growth that a Squarespace had.
Right.
Simply because
you saw like over 100% growth or something for Squarespace, I think.
Yeah,
and like
Wix was 150. It's high, but I mean we can't grow 150%. It's simple. There's not enough web for us to do that. So it's a flawed metric in that regard, but it is good to look at it to just realize, like, okay, some of these guys are growing harder than you'd think if you just look at the small numbers, because the numbers are all relatively small. Squarespace has 1.5% market share now, and Shopify has something like that too. That's relatively small, but if you then look at their revenue numbers and see how much money they are making by hosting 1.5% of the top 10 million websites in the world, because that's what all of this is based on. And that doesn't mean that they have only 1.5% of 10 million sites. They probably have more, but they just don't fit into that top 10 million sites in the world because there's a lot more than 10 million sites in the world. So in itself, that's a flawed metric.
Yeah, that's probably important just to touch on for people, because I think a lot of people say this stat, like WordPress powers a third of the web. Technically not correct, or just to make sure that people know that when they're saying that, it does come from this W3 score, W3 tech score of it. So we're talking about the top 10 million sites online, and we're talking about market share of those sites.
Yeah. So what they do, and built with another statistics provider does something similar. They scrape the top 10 million sites as provided by Alexa, which is it's basically a flawed metric, but over time, it gives a good view of market share because you're comparing it to itself. That doesn't mean that it's definitely the truth. To be fair, I think that if we measured the entire web, our market share would probably be higher because I think we do better in smaller sites. WordPress, when you look at these numbers, you're looking at WordPress.org and .com. And WordPress.com probably does better in the smaller section as well. So there's not a whole lot of .com sites in that 33%. I don't know the numbers.
Agree. Like if you look at the 10 million to 20 million, I think you'd see higher than the 33.1% of WordPress share there.
So what does that look like? Well, in my perspective, there's a couple of things to note there. One is that Squarespace and Wix and Weebly that got acquired by Square, they all have a lot of money spent on marketing. And they do things like Super Bowl ads and pre-rolls for every bloody WordPress video on YouTube. And
I get a lot of YouTube ads for Shopify and Wix and Weebly, and I've never been to their sites, but somehow they find me anyway.
Yeah, well, they target you based on your WordPress preference, probably. So,
right, they try to convert me, right?
Yeah, and they have a lot of money to burn on that stuff, and we don't. So we need to be more creative. But apparently that method of marketing is working because they're growing fast. Now, all of them are burning money. I think Wix is profitable. I don't know about Squarespace, but they all look relatively okay-ish, but they also look like they're beefing up their numbers. But yeah, we'll have to see over time whether they can keep that growth up. But it's good to realize that you have a couple of competitors in that top 10 of CMSs in the world that are spending tens of millions, if not more, on marketing. And that you have to be creative and outdo them in another way to keep up. Otherwise, our growth might turn negative or even slow down.
Yeah. I think that, there's a lot in there. It seems like WordPress, I have a hard time thinking of it, declining in market share, but it's with the fast growth of some of these other companies, I think it's possible.
I do too. I don't think that's a likely outcome. I don't think that will quickly go to a decline. But it's one of the questions that I get asked the most when I took this role is like, how are you going to look at WordPress.com versus .org, etc.? I actually think that WordPress.com plays a role in this because it allows us to compete with Squarespace and Shopify and Wix. And I'd hope other people would build something similar on WordPress multi-site and use that wisely, etc. But I think that that allows us to compete with those SaaS kind of services that people apparently want, while also maintaining the strength of .org and the fact that you can go to a full install for yourself on its own server, etc. I mean, in the top 10 million sites, the vast majority is .org sites. Why is that? Well, because they're all too big to be run on a .com instance because they need more than that. But that's fine. I mean, there's probably a lot more VIP customers in there or other like large hosting company customers in there. I know we're in that top 10 million with Yoast.com. I can assure you that we don't run on one small server. It's a lot more than that. And I think it's good. So it basically adds to each other and it makes sure that we have both the SaaS side and the self-hosted side of this market that we can cover that.
Do you think that WordPress.com is going to be the main kind of tool we can, that'll be battling against the Wixes and the Squarespace? I think the people usually go to those for their built out, for the not just the drag and drop functionality and the simple functionality, but just the fact that they can push something up pretty easily. And I think WordPress.com is probably more comparable than the WordPress.org. Do you think that the .com is what's going to help us to continue to gain market share there? Or do you think it's more of the .org?
I think it's both, to be honest. I think both are still growing, and I don't know the .com numbers, so I couldn't even tell you, but I think we need both. I think we need have the fact that we have both makes us stronger, and the fact that we can add to each other because it powers .com. And Matt spends so much of his money and people on making the product better. I don't think a lot of people realize how many people that really are. I mean, it's not one or two developers. It's entire teams of developers that are working constantly on making WordPress better for both .org and .com. And that has been the investment that has sustained this ecosystem, which is also why I'm like, there's this dichotomy that people make from it that I just don't think is true. It's one and the same thing in many ways. And of course, there are differences, and those are fine. But we're all using WordPress.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think a lot of people have this like, what is WordPress.com and what is WordPress.org and what is the difference? And it's confusing. And I think that is true. I think there's somewhat of a like, what is what? What am I? Some people don't know what they're on, but I think for the vast majority of people, it's just WordPress is a publishing platform. You mentioned this kind of before the show.
Yeah, and we see people move from .com to self-hosted, and then because they want stuff that they can't do on .com yet, hey, that's fine. I mean, that's the ecosystem allows for that, and I think that's the strength of the ecosystem. You don't have you. It's quite hard to outgrow WordPress, and I think that's a strength. I think that Wix and Weebly and Shopify will have a very hard time competing with the fact that you can't outgrow it.
Yeah, that does seem to be why people would move from somewhere else like a Wix or a Shopify to a WordPress because, well, if you can't do something on their system that you want to do that's somewhat custom or that they just don't offer, then you literally have to move if you want to do that.
Yeah, and usually in our case, it just requires a plugin that's already there. So there's a vast majority of functionality that we already have that they have to spend money to build, where we just have like these 40,000 plugins in the plugin repository that offer all sorts of functionality. I think that's the strength of WordPress. It's what I love about WordPress, is that you can basically use it to build anything.
Yep, I agree with that. When I heard that you were going to be the marketing and communications lead at WordPress, I thought you were the perfect selection for a position like this, having run a company like Yoast. Because if you do a search for SEO on Google and you look at all the top websites, they're all WordPress sites. There are no Squarespace sites, there are no Wix sites, and Yoast as the majority, having the most market share of SEO plugins in WordPress, you're significantly responsible for a lot of that. And I think that because WordPress has been so successful as a publishing platform, not just because of things like Gutenberg, where you can publish easily and it makes it, and actually writing content is not difficult, but how do you get that content out in front of people? How do you make yourself visible online? I mean, that's just as important as the writing part. And so I think that you've helped us get this far, and Yoast as a company has helped us get this far, only in even the last 5-6 years, but really over the last even longer than that you guys have been working on it. So having gotten us this far, I think you're the person to help us move forward. I think you have I feel like you have a very good knowledge of where we are and where we need to go. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Well, thanks for the compliment. I hope to live up to it.
Yeah, no pressure at all. The one of the last things I'd love to dig into a little bit is for the rest of us here, for me and other listeners for the podcast. You have a team of 100 plus people at Yoast, which I guess now is technically your wife's team at Yoast, but y'all's team at Yoast.
I still work at Yoast I'm in the Yoast offices right now. I mean, four out of my 5 days a week I spend on Yoast, and one of those days I try to spend on WordPress. That's about the share of time it gets.
Gotcha. That's good to know. I didn't know
that. In all honesty, right now it's one day and all of my evenings. But I mean, there's a choice there. I do both. So I'm still the chief product officer at Yoast too, and there's a lot of cool things that we're doing at Yoast. So I just want to keep on doing both.
Very cool. The question I want to answer about the company is that you guys have 100 plus people. You've said you've kind of dedicated, double-digit people full-time working to be dedicating their time to WordPress development or pushing WordPress forward, whatever area it's in. Like, what advice would you have for people who are working at smaller companies, or even kind of doing solo work, working with themselves or working, as freelancers, etc.? How can people help to push WordPress as a whole forward without some of those bigger resources that a bigger company might have?
There's a lot of ways, actually. I would always recommend you go to a WordCamp that has a contributor day and start there and see which teams that you like. And there's a lot of different teams at contributor days that basically add new people and help you get set up to do work on WordPress. And that can be a whole lot of different things. So if you're a developer, you can work on core, but you can also work on a team that I spent most of my time in the last decade called Meta, which is like the team that maintains WordPress.org itself and everything around it. But there's also a design team. There's a marketing team, of course. There's a docs team that's just writing docs. So if you don't have a whole lot of time, but for instance, you could help us move some of the docs on the codex to the new help hub that we're working on. Simple stuff like that. Even moving one doc a month over from one to the other would already be like awesome. If 100 people do that, we'll be done in a couple of weeks from now. So there's a lot of small jobs that need to happen. And it's a great way to meet new people and also to build yourself a backbone of people that are very knowledgeable about WordPress so that you can reach out to them if in your daily job you run into problems with WordPress that you can't fix yourself. For us, one of the reasons we spend so much time on WordPress core is because it just really helped us, to know where WordPress is going and to even guide some of that, but B, also to make sure that we can integrate better than anyone else because we know the system better than anyone else. I mean, for Gutenberg, we built all of the APIs that plugins need to integrate. We built those because we needed them. Of course, that's a huge contribution to WordPress, but it's also a contribution to us being able to maintain the quality that we wanted to with Gutenberg for our own product. So it works both ways.
Yeah, I think that's a very fascinating point. I think a lot of people think about a contributor day as like, okay, I have to go and I have to spend time, an extra day to like help WordPress. And how much is it really going to help my company or help myself as a freelancer? And I think it's actually just the opposite. Like, I think like the more you go to contributor days, the more people you get to know, the more closely you get to know WordPress, the core contributing teams, how WordPress really works and functions. Especially if you're someone technical, you're going to really understand how to build software or build plugins or run a marketing company or anything like that. You're going to be able to do it better because you understand the network better. You understand, you know people in the space better. You understand a little bit better how the community works.
Yeah, you're learning from others. I mean, I think that's the biggest strength of all of this is if you can learn from other systems and learn from other people. And that really is very worthwhile. And you don't have to be a developer for that. I mean, one of the biggest teams at a lot of these contributor days is our support team that answers questions in the forums. That might seem very benign, but it's like the backbone of everything that we have. So I'd really urge people to start there and then figure out, okay, which team do I feel most at home in and can I learn most in? And then start there. And then if a year later you want to do something else, by all means, go do that.
Yeah, very cool. I dig it. Yoast, this has been a blast. I appreciate you jumping on. This has been a lot of fun.
I'm happy to come back anytime.
Cool. Let's see. We usually close the show out. Why don't you tell people where they can find you online, Twitter or website, etc.?
So I'm at J de Valk on Twitter, JDEVALK, on Yoast.blog, as in JOOST.blog. Of course, I'm on Yoast.com, YOAST.com. And then, well, if you've got all three of those, then you're probably sick of me already. So let's stick to that.
You can always look out. You always know Yoast from their style of cartoons and animations there online. So I'm on your Twitter profile right now, and I'm like, yeah, I see this all the time because it's very distinct. You always know.
It's it's one of our illustrators does those. It's a lot of work, but it's very worthwhile. Yeah.
Yeah, very cool. I've been thinking about doing more custom, or customizing our brand a little bit more with our design style. And one of the main drivers is you guys, because I'm sure a lot of people see you guys and are like, yes, we know Yoast through the animation, but of course it takes a lot of time to put all these together, a lot of resources. But at the end of the day, if you're at the size where it makes sense, then definitely worth it.
To be honest, I think it's the other way around. If I can be real quick, my third hire was a designer. My fourth hire was an illustrator. So it's the other way around. Building a brand is more important than anything else.
Looks like I have some work to do after I get off this call with you. Okay. Any illustrators listening to this podcast, reach out to me, please.
I mean, building that brand is really important.
Hey, that's an excellent place to finish, I think, for anybody listening, because, hey, from someone who's built a company of over 100 people that the brand was central in that. So design and illustration should be a first, you should think about it sooner rather than later.
Absolutely.
Cool, Yoast. The last thing I always ask guests is if you wouldn't mind just asking our audience to give us a little 5-star iTunes review. That'd be awesome if you could just kind of like, hey, ask people if they would mind doing that.
Hey, if you've just listened to this awesome podcast and you know that it's worth a 5-star review, right? Go do it now.
There you go. And if you have any questions for the show, you can feel free to email them in yo@wpmrr.com. We answer questions on the show every once in a while, so shoot those in. If you have any questions for Yoast, you can shoot those to us, or you can shoot them to him on Twitter, but if you shoot them to us, we'll forward them to him so he can take a look. What else did I have? Do I have anything else? I think I'm good. We asked for reviews. We asked people to email us questions. That's all. We'll have another episode next Tuesday. Yoast, again, thanks for jumping on. Love hearing about where WordPress is going. Excited for what's next.